Welcome back to Made Possible by Pop Culture, the podcast. This is season 2. I'm still Danielle Terciano, and this is still the podcast where I invite guests to come and share stories from pop culture's past and present that have greatly influenced them. This is actually a pretty special episode for me. So when I was a kid, we had to learn about Greek mythology in school, and I assume that's true for many of you, but I was pretty anti-establishment growing up. I would argue I still am. That's why I don't really love working for big corporations, but that's a story for another day. That basically means when I was a kid that if you gave me an assignment, I tried to find ways to think outside the box and skirt what you were really asking. So enter freshman year, 9th grade English class. Our first assignment is to write a one-page paper titled, "What is a myth?" Now, a lot of kids probably did the Webster's Dictionary defines blah, blah, blah. I took it as an opportunity to tap into something creative and write a fictional myth to say this is an example of a myth. I ended up getting an A+. That particular teacher was impressed and liked my creativity and thinking outside of the box nature, although I do feel like that might have been the best grade I got all semester. Who knows? I say all of that to say that I really only dabbled in mythology in that way, creating my own version. And maybe that should have set me up to adapt things later in life and continue down that path. I didn't. Thankfully, my guest did. That's right. Maybe you already know who I'm thinking of. I don't know. I'm going to just say it. Charlie Covell, creator of The End of the Fucking World from Netflix, which is a big favorite of mine. Also creator of True Love and also creator of KAOS. That's how this all comes back to mythology. Obviously, that mythology was a big influence on Charlie growing up. We're going to get into the details on that as we always do. And we're also going to talk a little bit about KAOS Season 1, which is streaming on Netflix. First of all, Charlie, welcome to the podcast. I'm very excited for this episode, not just because I love your work, but because I read, and you can tell me if this is a misquote, a misprint, but I read when you were talking about KAOS that one of the things you loved growing up was Clash of the Titans, and that you watched it weekly, if not daily. And I read that and I said, that's the kind of intense passion I want on this podcast. And then I heard you were interested in coming on the podcast, and I was like, magic. Is that true?
Yeah, it is true. And I checked with my parents recently because we've been doing press, and I was like, that is true, isn't it? And they said, yeah, it was. So it came out in 81. I was born in 84. So they had it on VHS. And I think I must have been 4 or 5 when I discovered it. And yeah, I was apparently obsessed with it, and would watch it all the time, learned bits of it off by heart. Mum said that there was a train journey where I just told the story on the train, and this man was like, "I think your kid is very bright," and she was like, "No, it's just copying it's a movie, yeah." And but busting out all these classical names and stuff. I just like this awful precocious child, I think, which I was. But so yeah, I don't know, and I rewatched it where just a few weeks ago. Because I wanted to talk a bit about it when we were doing press, because it was a big thing for me as a kid. And I was also like, it's quite violent, isn't it? It's like,
so it's violent, but it's like 80s violent where the effects aren't that great. So I almost feel like when you're a kid watching it, do you think it is real? Did you feel like you believed what was happening, or were you able to disconnect because, you're not seeing a lot of blood?
No, I think it can't have been too traumatic. And the blood is very, viscous stuff coming out of the bag when Medusa's head and stuff. So I think it was probably not, I don't remember it being terrifying. But then when I watched it recently, I actually found the beginning really arresting, when he's putting Danae into the box with the baby, and all that, the scenes that weren't kind of the Harryhausen effects, I thought were actually more kind of arresting and upsetting. And I don't know that as a kid that would have necessarily, I don't remember it being a traumatic film. I remember it being an incredibly exciting thing that I loved, and I think I probably wanted to be Perseus, and so there's all of that going on.
Well, I mean, I would also imagine with that when you first watched it, because you said you were like 4 or 5, you might not have connected what he was doing with that box, which I feel like if I had watched it for the first time at that age, I probably wouldn't have connected it. But it does, I mean, you kind of already set this up. I always like to ask everyone to kind of set the scene in terms of the first time you saw it and what drew you in. And for this, I kind of had a two-part to that question because it's obviously based on real mythology. So I was, what's the chicken and the egg? That was my question, was if this came first for you, or if you had already been learning about mythology and that's what drew you to the movie. But if to hear you say you watched this for the first time at 4 or 5, I imagine this must have come first.
I was small, and I think, and it probably went, I think it went on for a few years. So I think it's kind of around 4 to 6, probably, possibly older, but it was my favorite film for a long time. And then I think because I don't remember anything before that in terms of myths, I'm pretty sure that was my kind of way in. I just loved it. I thought it was so magical, so heroic and romantic, and it was just my favorite thing. And also it's one of those things where, because my parents have told me about it so much, you know, some of it's like, is it a memory? Is it, you know, am I remembering them telling me about it? I don't know. But so yeah, but and then after that I got given a children's book of Greek mythology, which I have somewhere here.
Oh,
I'll
nice.
find it in a sec. But it's but I had this kids book, and I was quite, as I will explain, I was quite obsessive about things. So that I read non-stop, and then we got it on audio cassette. We'd have it in the car all the time, and it was read by the actor who played Manuel in Fawlty Towers, Andrew Sachs, and it was the most brilliant reading of the myths. And I just kind of, yeah, I was just always really enthralled by them. And then as I got older, I read things like The Tale of Troy by Roger Lankin Green. So I was reading quite sort of traditional myths. And then when I became a teenager and got into my 20s, I then fell in love with, you know, interesting retellings of those myths. So books like The Penelope Ad by Margaret Atwood, or Wait by Jeanette Winterson. And there's this amazing poetry collection by Carol Ann Duffy called The World's Wife, when she retells stories from the female point of view. So some of them are myths, some of them are kind of figures from history. And there's a really brilliant poem about Orpheus and Eurydice, which was very much an inspiration for me writing KAOS, because it's kind of not as great a relationship as you might think from the myths.
See, that's my question though, because I don't know that I do think a lot of these relationships are great. I mean, and we say it in every piece of media about anything like this. I think they said it explicitly in Clash of the Titans, like history is written by the victor. So everything has a bias, everything has a tint. Certainly, I will say, I don't want to jump too far ahead to KAOS yet, but like certainly in KAOS, I didn't think their relationship was so great, but I also wonder how much of it was my own projection of like, I find what he's doing very selfish, because she never said she wanted any of that. And as we're seeing her point of view, she didn't want that as she was going through her journey, which is its whole other conversation. But as I'm hearing you talk about the various real myths and then the various interpretations, did you have one that like was a favorite? I hate to use the word favorite, but I'm curious if there was a character, maybe even from Clash of the Titans.
In the film?
I was gonna say from the film, or honestly from any of these things that you've mentioned, if you felt like there was one you kept coming back to over and over again as something that was very meaningful to you personally.
That's a good question. Well, as a side, I think my favorite character in the film is Bubo, the mechanical version of the owl.
Really? Oh, I found him
incredible.
annoying. Okay.
he's like R2-D2 in Star Wars.
True.
I love him. And I think I just thought Perseus was the best thing ever. So I think as a kid, I was projecting onto that main character and just thought he was great. In terms of the myths, I've always been really fascinated by Prometheus, because he is, you know, the god arguably on the side of the humans. He gives humans fire and is punished for it. So I always felt drawn to him, and I knew I wanted him to be the narrator in KAOS, because he's the way to, you know, letting the humans in. And then, I mean, to be honest, I don't know if I have favorites.
Yeah, I don't really love using that word. I'll be honest. Like I use it a lot, and then I'm like, it's a very reductive word. But just something I either use that word, or I say like the one that you felt just most personally drawn to. That sometimes you use the word obsession before, and I think that's maybe a good way to talk about it too. Like the one you kept coming back to, the way you watch the movie over and over again.
Yeah, I think the Orpheus and Eurydice thing, that story always fascinated me. And then when I read this retelling, I was like, oh, that's so clever. That's so brilliant, because she's in most of the myths, she's very passive. and it's just this romantic story that he goes to get his wife. And then there was this idea that, does she want him to go? Does she actually
Exactly.
maybe like being dead because he's finally not hassling her all the time? And it's not quite as kind of cut and dried as that in KAOS, but I love the idea of giving her, giving her more agency. And that was very much inspired by the Penelope ad as well, because you see everything from Penelope's point of view. And it's crazy, but it blew my mind, because obviously I hadn't read that before, and I was a teenager before I was like, oh yeah, they are all through the male gaze, of course they are.
Right.
Which is an obvious thing to say, but at
But
the
you don't think
time
about
it was
it.
kind
Yeah.
of not at all. No. And thinking about and actually rewatching the film, I was, because like you were thinking, there's a version where Andromeda might think, I don't want to marry any of these people. And
Yes.
now I've got to be fucking grateful because he's rescued me from the Kraken. Oh, brilliant. There's a world in which you could flip that and just tell it from her point of view. But I'm not saying anything original, I don't think, but I think I think when I realized that there was a tradition of
Mm.
retelling myths and then reading these stories by incredible, often female storytellers or poets, going, how about this version? I just thought that was so exciting. So it was definitely an inspiration for me. And also, but even Clash of the Titans, the original film. Also, I called it Clash of the Titans, which
Sure.
apparently, didn't catch on to that for a long time. But so it was a very family joke for a long time. But yeah, so even in that film, they do not play fast and loose, but there's aspects of the myths that they change. Like I think Perseus in mythology, and we kind of came to this in KAOS, this idea of trying to avoid your prophecy. There's a prophecy that Danae's father, the king who puts her in the box with Perseus, he does it in the myth because he's told that his grandson's going to kill him. And in the myth, it comes full circle, and Perseus accidentally kills him as an adult with a discus or something. I can't remember what it is exactly, but there's various versions of how that prophecy comes to fruition at the end of Perseus's story. In this film, Zeus kills him in the first 5 minutes with that the release of the Kraken and
Right.
all the VFX and stuff. So yeah, I guess even that, the first thing I saw was taking the myth and doing something slightly different with it. So I guess it felt like there was, looking back when I learned more about it, there's kind of hopefully there's a tradition of changing things, and that's all right. And these aren't sacred texts; they're kind of ripe for reinvention, because you've always got the original. That's the thing, trying to do something different with it I don't think negates what you've drawn on. And then also, I know we haven't come to KAOS yet, but the other thing you made that interesting point about history being written by the winners and the victors, and I think that's the thing I wanted to explore with Zeus, is that he's written these stories, so he's the teller of the myths. And so the other thing we were kind of playing around with and having fun with is the idea that the myths of Zeus is, what he wants the humans to believe. So Prometheus says it in episode 2, he says, you write the narratives, you tell the stories. And then in 8, you have Persephone going, that's not what happened. Why did you tell everybody that he kidnapped me? I love the guy. And so it was kind of having, I was interested in Zeus being the head storyteller, I suppose, as it were.
So before we get too deep in there, I do want to go back,
Sure.
talk a little bit more about Clash of the Titans. I don't know why I started to say Attack of the Titans, because I know I might be a little bit more stuck on this than you are, because you've lived this your whole time. But I want to know about the repetition and how much you absorbed it, how much you watched it through the years, how that affected your viewing of it, and if some of these things, that you're talking about that you didn't notice necessarily on the first watch, how much they maybe changed your perception of things and your love of the movie as you started to notice them. Because I'll be totally honest with you, I never saw it in childhood. I watched it for the first time a couple of years ago, and then I rewatched it for this. And even just watching it, couple years ago, maybe 20 years ago. And then now I noticed a big difference in how I was viewing things. And I don't know what that says about me, that I didn't figure something out 20 years ago as an adult, but I do wonder, when you love it as a kid and you don't, there are certain things that you're not thinking about. And I don't want to put words in your mouth for any of the specifics, but I want to just get a sense of, how that changed over time, if it changed over time. And then I might have a few specifics to ask you about because I've noticed them. And I was like, am I the only one that noticed this? Maybe.
I think, okay, so broadly, I think as a child, all I remember is just thinking the story was kind of perfect. I just wanted to watch it again. I think like I say, I loved Perseus. I
Yeah.
think I was, again, I was young, so I'm kind of, I don't want to kind of make stuff up, but the vague memory I have of it is just that it was I loved Zeus, and I kind of, even though he's a complicated figure, but Zeus was kind of a goodie, like he was
Mhm.
the good god. And I liked that he wanted to protect his son, and his son was this hero, and he did these incredible tasks, and he got the girl at the end. It's a very traditional
Yes.
heroic story, and I think it was satisfying and compelling. I found it, scary and thrilling, and I loved the bit. I mean, and I think actually the biggest thing, obviously, watching it as an adult, and I remember watching it, I think in my 20s, and I had to turn it off because I thought, oh no, I can't, the special effects, they don't do the same thing now. I
Yes.
remember it was the same as the BBC did this version of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And as a child, it was like the best thing ever. The White Witch was terrifying. The lion looked
Mhm.
real. And then you go back and you think, ah.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe this is me. So 20 years ago, I was in film school, so I don't know if I should even admit this, but I do feel like I didn't think the Calibos mask was that bad at the time,
No, no.
except
Yeah,
for
yeah.
the moment when his face gets touched, because then I saw the mask move and I went, oh, okay. But they were doing the best that they could.
Yeah,
So
yeah. And I think, and the combination of the stop motion and the live action, and I think the editing is fantastic. I think the editing is still brilliant. The way they cut from the stop motion to the live action, and obviously the depth of field is, and the perspective isn't always right, and the sizing and stuff. But and you're trying to see it through. But as a child, I clearly just loved it, and was, and as I don't know what the reception was at the time from adults, but I watched it with my parents who also really
right.
enjoyed it. So I don't think it was I don't remember it being remarked on as bad. But when I was older and obviously seeing things that had, I think, if you watch it after you've seen something like Jurassic Park, let's
Sure.
say, then I think I do remember, I think I was a teenager going, I don't want to watch it because it's spoiling something that in my head is perfect. And actually
Mhm.
I don't want a teenager or an adult brain on this. And it was only really going back to it more recently, and then very recently, that I think I can now see as an adult so much, sounds pretentious, but so much more beauty in it. Like I think that first scene, like I say, is
Right.
really, really beautifully performed. It's, I mean, some of it's very heightened, but all the actors are incredible. The actors playing the gods are just, it's the first time I saw Maggie Smith in anything, and became completely obsessed with her as an actress, saw her in everything. Went to all her plays in the West End, and I didn't realize actually till rewatching it a few months ago that I think her husband wrote the screenplay, and I don't know if that's
Oh,
how they met. Beverly Cross, I'm pretty sure that's her second husband, I think. So yeah, and I'm just such a fan of her as an actress. I think she's incredible. And yeah, I think the acting is, Tim Piggott Smith, very young Tim Piggott Smith, he's brilliant. Yeah, so I think as an adult, I think I loved it as a kid. There was a difficult patch as a teenager, young adult, where I went, I don't want to spoil what was. And as an adult, I've been able to come back to it and see lots of incredible stuff in it, particularly for the time. And the scene with the witches is really funny with the eye. Like there's lots. It's really, I think it's really funny. I think Bubo, the owl. I know you didn't like it. I think he's really funny.
it's not that I
I
didn't
love.
like him. I don't want everyone on the internet to get mad at me. I just the noises really started to get to me. Like the noise they
Yeah.
made when he was flying around. I was like, I don't know if the sound mix in my version was bad or whatever,
Okay.
but I was like, it's too loud, it's too grating.
I think I always find it kind of charming, but I see it. But and I love stuff like I don't know, even the crossfades when Thetis
Mhm.
takes his figurine Perseus and puts him down on the
Yes.
ground and moves him to Joppa, and he wakes up, and the way the camera pans, to his point of view, and I don't know, parts of it do feel, I guess, a bit shonky because of what we can do now in film, but
No,
I
but
think there's still a
that's
magic, there's, and that felt very kind of raw, and there are these moments, and Medusa, parts of it maybe seem absurd, like particularly when he kills her and the blood is so viscous. But I think that the craft of it still, to me, stands up, and I think she's still pretty scary in that, and the way that she moves. I think when if you have to get on board with it if you're watching it now, and when you've done that, I still think it's really, enjoyable.
Yeah, and I will say, I think that is also the difference for me, because I wasn't assuming you were going to talk about the effects and the crafts when I asked that question, but when I watched it for the first time 20 years ago, that's why we were watching it. I think it actually was a class assignment in college, if I'm remembering correctly. So most people had already seen it. I had never seen it. And we were looking at it for things like what they did practically, because maybe they had to. They didn't have the effects that we had even 20 years ago, and how it stood up or didn't stand up. When I rewatched it to talk to you, I was much more focused on the story this time around. And that's when I started to like pick at it, because as you said earlier, it is the very traditional storytelling, and it is, he is coming to save the day and he is the hero. And it's like, but is he?
Yeah,
you know what I
completely.
mean? And also, like, at the end, even at the end of it, when there's that comment about like, what if courage and imagination become everyday mortal qualities? And it's like, well, they kind of already are, because he's half mortal. So like that threw me a little bit. But and then I started to pick at like, well, was there even a question of if he would succeed because he's Zeus's kid? And so then I went down this rabbit hole of nipple babies,
Oh,
which
you're right.
I
Yeah.
would have thought about 20 years ago. So I just had this real just spiral. And so I was like, I don't think anyone else would have that spiral, but
That's
let me
great.
see what you
You're
thought.
so right. Like, you're so right. Like, how is there any jeopardy when he's Zeus's son? You're so right. Because of course it's fine. That's so true. Yeah, you're
I don't
totally
know.
right. And I
Maybe
think
when you're half mortal, some things can hurt you a little bit, but
I think it's
it's not a
I think
level
it's the
play.
other gods. It's the other gods and goddesses
Right.
and the way that they impact on the humans, I guess. So
Right.
that, the gods being on opposing sides as if they're little, players on a football pitch or something, or like, oh, ants they're going to burn, I suppose. But yeah, you're totally right, and that embarrassingly hadn't occurred to me. I think what I found, like I said, which relates to my point about Orpheus and Eurydice, is just that the women are very secondary, and I
Right.
think that's something I didn't notice as a kid. But like, I mean, everything I watched, you have to get on
But
board
yes.
with the
Yeah.
patriarchy to enjoy films, don't you? From
Well,
from childhood, I think. But
yeah, it's not even if
and
you
also,
didn't notice it, it was actively being sent to you as this is how it should be, or this is how it is. Like I had this real moment of, he's watching her sleep. He's not
yeah,
kissing her
yeah.
awake the way they do in Snow White, but it's still very similar. And I'm sure Snow White stole from the mythology because that came first. But to me, I started having those moments of like, oh, I think that's maybe why I had so much problem when we learned about mythology in school, was that it
Mm.
is so patriarchal, and it is so, you weren't allowed to question certain things.
Yeah, and I think, looking at this story, Danae has a baby. She's locked. I mean, she's locked away,
Right.
and Zeus, comes to her as a whatever, like a shower of gold, and does it, I don't know. We don't really talk about consent in mythology, do we? And so he's protecting this kid who he had possibly not against the woman's will. It's never implied in this version, I don't think, but
Sure.
it's, the origins are dubious, and then there's the whole bit when Thetis and Hera are talking about, oh, the time that Zeus tried it on with me as a cuttlefish, and it's all, it's kind of, they make light of it, but I don't know, with a modern, and I'm sometimes a bit loath to put a modern lens on everything, because you could never watch anything
That's true.
ever and enjoy it, and it's sort of, I think particularly with films from childhood that you hold dear, I'm always a bit nervous to do that, because I don't want to pick it apart
Mm.
with adult eyes, but then it's important to look at what you were absorbing and thinking, but all of those male heroes, you think, Indiana Jones and James Bond, and any film, anything I watched as a kid, on the whole, it would be a male lead, and that's why things like Thelma and Louise or Fry Green, should I say tomatoes? I mean, I would say tomatoes, but I feel for that film I have to say tomatoes. But that's why those films were so revolutionary and revelatory,
Mhm.
because you think, wow, I haven't seen this before, that these women are the protagonists. So and that was definitely something in KAOS that, I think if you look at where the power sits in episode 1 and where the power sits in episode 8,
Yes.
I think there has been a realignment in terms of who has it,
Yeah.
and it's not all the men.
Right. And I mean, you also said it earlier, like we're not just telling the same myth, we're retelling it in a new version. There's new perspectives. That's, I think, the most important thing. Even if you love the original, well, there's no reason to do the original again. There's a reason to put a new spin on an older story, and that's why this is valuable. I think that's also why so many people are responding so well to it, because it is not just saying, the patriarchy of the gods is the end all be all, and we're just going to
Yeah,
stick with that,
I think also because the patriarchy of the gods isn't good for the humans. It isn't good for the female gods as
Not
well.
good
So
for
there's kind of a
anyone.
lot at stake. No, but it's not, it's a huge discussion to have. But I think also, I mean, because a part of me, I remember when I was thinking about this, it's like, because there is a part of me going, who the hell do you think you are that you
Mm,
can try and retell these? But then I thought, well, and that's why I was so inspired by those female authors I mentioned, because it felt like, oh, people have done it. I don't know if KAOS does it as, I've, I can't be the one to judge that, but in terms of how well it's done, but I felt like I felt permission to do it because of these incredible other versions that existed, and it felt like that, and because they sparked such kind of excitement in me, um, I felt really inspired to try and do something similar. Yeah.
yeah, I can't speak to how it compares because I haven't seen a lot of the ones that you were talking about, but I will say that I genuinely enjoyed yours, and I probably would not have watched it if I thought it was going to be too much like the older myths that I grew up watching and
Mm.
reading, because I just was not really into that. Like, when I got
Yeah,
a
yeah.
little nervous when I heard that's what the show was about, because I was like, it looks cool. Like, the visuals look cool. I love the cast. I love your work, but I don't know because I don't love the
Mm.
source material. And so then to watch it and to be like, oh no, this is cool. I recognize things, but I don't feel like I need to know every nitpicky fact from the actual Greeks to know what's happening here. And I'm actually curious from your perspective, if you feel like if people go into it a scholar of that type of work, do you feel like they're watching it almost wrong if they're looking for certain things that maybe you never set out to give them because you're telling your own version of the story? Like, if they think they know where the story is going, doesn't that ruin the experience?
Um, well, it's a really good question, and it's something I kind of wondered about a lot. I think ultimately you have to try and make something. I don't think you can think about an imaginary audience too much, because I think you'd send yourself mad, because you'd be trying to do what you think people want, and
Hmm.
ultimately think what I was trying to do, or we were trying to do as a team, was make something that was authored uh and for me, what would I want to watch? And I'm a big nerd about this stuff. So
Yeah.
for me, I love knowing the myths, but going, oh, okay, they've done that with it. Oh, okay, that's interesting. Oh, I wouldn't have, wouldn't have, and spotting these Easter eggs that are kind of peppered throughout in the dialogue and the design. And so, but I didn't want anyone thinking, oh God, I've got to do homework to watch this
Hmm.
show, because that's tedious. And I think also people, in my experience, people love to chuck a classical reference down to seem academic or intelligent, and sometimes it can be used in a way that's a bit patronizing or a bit kind of, I don't know, a bit exclusionary. And I never wanted the show to be that.
Yeah.
So my hope was that you could come to it knowing absolutely nothing about the myths, which I think people have done, and that you could come to it knowing loads about the myths and kind of enjoy messing around with them. And then there are elements that stay true, and there are some that veer wildly off. But there should always, in every myth, my rule was that it had to be rooted in something, even if it was something tiny.
Hmm.
Something had to root it back to the original. Otherwise, why are you doing it? Just it becomes a kind of show just where people have unusual names, and it doesn't. It has to be rooted in the myths to justify it being an adaptation. Was my rule.
Hmm.
But we did a screening that I was really nervous about, at the British Museum, with loads of fans of mythology, and I think he was called the Keeper of Greek and Roman Artifacts.
Oh no.
And he was moderating, and I was thinking, oh my God, how is this going to go down? And it was amazing, because people, like, sitting in that audience, people laughing at these tiny jokes, these tiny
Mhm.
things that I thought, oh, I wonder if anyone will get that. And it was so much fun, and actually they were such a generous audience, and people were, broadly speaking, I mean, only the people that liked it came up to me. No one came up and sort of punched me in the face. There may have
That's
been
good.
people who wanted to,
I mean,
was
I
positive.
don't know that there were, but I mean, it's good that that was the experience, because I know that when I don't like something, I definitely want everybody to know I don't like it. So, I mean, I would take it as maybe nobody had that experience, and that's great.
It's Britain, so people may be too polite to come and be like,
Oh,
that was terrible.
fair.
So to my face, but people and the moderator said, oh, I think you totally have permission to retell these. He was really complimentary about it. So that made me feel relieved, because you don't want to mess around with stuff that people love. And I mean, but then again, there are some people who are big into mythology who don't like it. So you can't please everybody, and you shouldn't try. But there's a set of people, I think, who love and know the Greek myths, who like the show and see kind of and like what we've done with it, which I think was my intention. And then there are people who know nothing about the myths who like the show. So that's great as far as I'm concerned.
So I don't know if this is also a very big, broad, it is. It's a big, broad question. I look at this vast source material, and I just I wouldn't know where to start. Obviously, I know you kind of started with Zeus and with this idea of wanting him to have a midlife crisis, but even that to me feels like there's still so many pieces to pull in together after that. Was there a piece of the story that you feel like came together the easiest for you when you were writing, and what was that, obviously? And then what would you say was the most challenging, whether it was getting a certain character to all of the things that you're talking about, like your version of quote unquote right, in the sense that you were just talking about, you want it to be open so that people who know them and don't know them can come in and enjoy this, but also in telling the story that you wanted to tell, knowing you're updating certain things.
Mm-hmm. So the first thing, what the thing I found easiest and the most enjoyable was creating the characters and writing the initial drafts. I love first drafts. I really enjoy a blank page, filling it and writing something that's a bit too long and a bit too kind of florid and over the top. I think the first draft was probably, I don't know, for what should have been 50 pages was 80 or something. And it was I mean, every god was in it. There was so much in it. I think we went to the underworld as well. So it was kind of feature length almost, I would say. It was just, and there were good bits in it, but it was just too long. And also because there were so many characters in it, it was feeling like, are we doing an anthology piece? Because you want to do so much, and people who read it kind of went, yeah, I like the vision, and I like what you've done with, the idea that it's kind of contemporary, but slightly other. But there's just too much. There's too much going on. So I think the thing I found easiest was creating the characters and going, oh, if we did this now, maybe we do this with this myth, and that would be fun. And okay, Riddy's not bitten by a snake. Let's have her hit by a truck, but it says Serpent Solutions on. Those things I love, and I find really enjoyable. I would be the first to say, and I think if you talk to anyone on the production team, plotting is not my strength. Okay. So I desperately need help with. So I find dialogue easy to write. I find characters easy to create and relationships to form. And I have ideas of moments and so set pieces. Plotting, I find much more difficult. So Sister, the production company, and Kate Carpenter, the producer, Caroline Buckley, who was our story producer, and Georgia Christie, who are at episode 6. We were developing this story, and we had a team of writers, like a writer's room back in 2019 for some early development. So they were all so helpful in helping me think about action and consequence and how to make the stories knit together. Because initially I was thinking, should we do an anthology? Do you kind of do 8 episodes and it's like a myth every episode, and it's our take on, the Minotaur, our take on Orpheus and Eurydice? You could do that as a kind of anthology, I think, and that could be fun. But there was this feeling, and it was right, it was no, it needs to be kind of bigger than that. And I think because if Zeus having a midlife crisis is something you want to talk about, that has to have consequences for the rest of the world, and that's the fun of it, and that's the drama of it, is that this dysfunctional family that rules the world, their petty squabbling, the fish rots from the head, it filters down into the world and has impacts on the mortals. And of course, that's what Clash of the Titans does brilliantly. It's their kind of fighting, and it has real life consequences. So I think the biggest challenge was hanging everything off that central spine of Zeus and Prometheus. And actually, in some additional photography we did the year after we finished filming, so 22 was the bulk of the shoot, And in 2023, we thought, right, we want more Zeus and Prometheus, because there was some, but the scenes between them were so brilliant, and their relationship just felt, and it was central in the initial drafts, but we all felt we wanted to flesh it out a little bit more, and just make it a little bit more muscular. So that was great to be able to do. But yeah, so I would say the hard thing was making everything connect, and to do that I had to lose quite a few things. There were characters that don't appear anymore, they were in the script. And we didn't shoot stuff really that got cut, but at script stage lots of stuff had to go, and some of it was painful. Hopefully we might get a second season, so I could have to
pieces to that, right? Like you mentioned, I wanted to follow up on, you talked about like that first episode when it was too long. I am curious if there are things that you took out of there that you moved to other places in the season that you still got to tell the story you wanted, or other things that you said, I have to hold this for a potential season 2 because it doesn't fit with the way that we are plotting this out.
So I don't want any spoilers in case we get series 2. So I won't talk specifically about the stuff that could go in, just in case.
But the answer is that yes, there is some.
Oh yeah. There's one particular storyline that I've kind of parked and gone, if we get a season 2, we'll put that in, because it's something I'm really excited to tell. Two things. And then, sorry, remind me of what you just said. So
in terms of the original pilot that you said was like 80 pages, and if there were things from that you were able to put in the show still, just maybe not where you thought they were going to be, what those were, and if those were, I guess, bigger challenges to figure out how to fit them in when they're not being where you thought they were.
Caeneus appeared in episode 1, so you went to the underworld and you got a lot of him. So I think really died in the middle of the episode initially of the pilot, and that was a classic. Someone was like, "Put that at the end." Put her arriving in the underworld as the hook, and I was thinking, oh, really? Okay.
Also, I'm the idiot that didn't know she was gonna die. So if you would that's the hook. You're absolutely right. I didn't know I was waiting for her to die that whole first episode. So I think if it had come too soon,
you think
I still would have wanted to keep going, but at the same time, I don't think it would have had the same emotional punch, because I thought I was gonna watch her leave this man and have a different journey of self-discovery than having it in the underworld. Again, I learned the myths at some point in school and didn't connect to them. So a lot of that stuff went out of my head as I got older. I'm sure I knew she was going to die at some point in my life and just forgot.
That's all right. That's good. Well, it would have been a shock, hopefully. So, but I think, so actually, hang on. So the death then went to the end, and then we thought, no, we need the hook to be she's in the underworld. So the reveal is that she's dead, but she's not disappearing from the show. So that became the hook. But Caeneus, so Caeneus's whole intro storyline, that then moves to episode 2. And actually what that did, which was useful, I think, was you set these 3 humans up. So Riddy takes the kind of episode 1, we intro her as the important human. Caeneus is the intro, second important human, episode 2. And Ari, who we've met very briefly in 1, becomes the focus in episode 3. So it felt like, to give all those characters their due weight and introduction, they kind of needed the space to do that. Obviously the line the thing you're trying to balance there is you don't want to do too many intro episodes, so it was working out how to deal with that feeling like and another thing. But the other option was introducing everybody in episode 1 that just felt like we were just assaulting people with information, and I think people just were going to switch off with that. So I think it was a really good note for me to just parcel things out a bit more cleanly. But no, I think a lot of stuff in that long script just moved basically, and some things coalesced. Like I think I had the Orpheus concert was happening, and there was a monument being put up, and someone went, "Do you want to?" I was like, "He can't sing when the shit on the monument." And someone said, "Well, could someone clear the shit of the monument?" I was like, "Yes, yep, that could work." I mean, sometimes I'm a bit literal, so so yeah, things like that were there were much more sophisticated story points that people gave me to help me, but so I needed a lot of help wrangling everything into one, hopefully coherent storyline.
I was going to ask though, when you decided to move Caeneus's intro, how did that affect the backstory? Did it change how you wanted to explain?
It did. Yeah, we used to start episode 2 in the script. I have to check, but in the script we met him in the underworld, dead, and we kind of went through the underworld through Caeneus's eyes, and then we met Riddy, a very early script. And what happened was with that is that because he's a wonderful, compelling character, but watching it 1 into 2, you were thinking, well, where's Riddy? Where's Riddy? Where's Riddy? Where is she? And also, where's Orpheus? These 2 people we're kind of really attached to. So then, rather than having Caeneus's death be a flashback in the middle of the episode, we thought a cold open would be better because you're just thinking, who is this guy? And then when you meet him later through Riddy's eyes, you're connected to him through her, and then you flip to him and you get his kind of things from his point of view. And that felt like a more compelling way to tell the story for audiences that have been following Riddy and Orpheus without going, and here's a new person, which I think the worry, I mean, obviously I know and love Caeneus and I think everybody falls in love with him, but you want to set that character up for the most powerful intro, and you don't want to kind of have that thing where people go, who is this? I want to get back to who I know.
Right.
You know, I mean, you could have done it in a number of ways, but it felt like his death was a really compelling way to start the mystery with his mum.
Yeah.
And then you kind of have him briefly in your head, and then you go back to Orpheus and Riddy. And then when you meet him in the queue, you're like, oh, it's the guy. Okay. Right. And then it feels like it was meant to be. There's something that feels inevitable about it in that version.
And I would also,
it did affect it.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, maybe this is just me, but I also feel like it sets him up as more of a hero in a way, because like I was already against Orpheus, just my own projection of like, well, she's bored with him. She wants to get away from him. I don't think he's abusive, but like, I'm on her side already. So like, good. And we see this new guy come in, and I'm like, not necessarily assuming there's going to be a romantic connection, but at least it's someone for her to have as a friend, as like a shoulder, as something. And so I'm like, okay, plus he loves dogs, so he's a hero. Like, that's just, if you know nothing about mythology, just focus on those things and you know he's a hero. Anyway,
there you go.
I also did want to talk to you though about, you know, the idea of reincarnation in the show, because I am a cynical person and I will just say I don't believe in it, but I loved watching the characters have this belief of like, we have believed this our whole lives for whatever reason we were told to, or we just genuinely believe. And they are so committed and they're so passionate about making it through. And obviously the show's been out for a while now. Like, I don't think it's a spoiler to say that like no one makes it through. It's not real. At least at this point, maybe there's going to be something somebody can fix in a season 2, who knows? But I am curious about bringing that in and saying, well, we're going to show this belief and we're going to also show that their belief is false. There's a real sense of sometimes the tone can shift so drastically when that happens. And I'm curious about how you wanted to walk that line and how you balance, like what you did to make sure you were balancing things in the right way so that all of a suddenly we weren't all in a death spiral.
Yes, good point. I mean, I think because that comes in episode 6, that reveal. So, I mean, broadly, to answer the tonal point first. So, I think in everything I've written, I think for me the tone is brought back by, so whenever anything veers into being too dark or too sentimental, broadly I use humor to bring it back to the tonal place where we've been, and music as well. So in that episode, you have the Fatboy Slim, you have it end on the reveal of Hera and Poseidon. So I think we were just careful that it wasn't this kind of, oh, you're all screwed, this is horrendous, because also Riddy and Caeneus have found out the truth. So there was a sense of like, as we discover it, we discover the people who are hopefully going to do something about this. True. But to your point about the show, the great lie, I suppose, that Zeus has been peddling, the idea that people go back when they go through the frame, that is a lie. But renewal itself is not a lie, because there's a line in episode 6 when Persephone says we have to go back to some base level of renewal. Mm-hmm. So the idea is that people were living and dying and so in my head, the kind of natural state of things before Zeus came along was, there was, and I think this is, sort of, I'm probably doing a kind of pseudo-Buddhist concept, but the idea is you don't die, you change, your atoms dissipate, but then they will form something else and you will go back into the world, like that brilliant stuff in the Philip Pullman trilogy, the His Dark Materials, that they
I thought you
return
were
to
going to say the end of The Good Place. Okay.
death is not final, but you in that particular body will cease to exist, but everything, your energy will go back into the world. That thing of you are part of the sea, but you're also a single drop of water. That was always the idea of and I don't want to say too much about this because chaos can represent a number of different things, and I don't want to lean too heavily on any of them. But the in the myths and in Metamorphoses, which is where the title comes from, before Zeus there was chaos. There was this kind of void of chaos, and Zeus brought order. But obviously in our version, do we like the order that Zeus has brought? Possibly not. So this was never meant to be a show that was criticizing faith or spirituality, but it was showing that this kind of ruling elite have set up a lie by which they control everybody. But the show exists, we still got the fates and the furies and things beyond Zeus and the gods. So this isn't saying there's nothing. It's not saying that you shouldn't believe in anything, because I think Hades says it to Zeus, there are forces greater than us. There just are. So they're not operating in a place where there is no higher being, but Zeus is taking control of Earth and human beings and manipulated them. That's the kind of thing. Have I answered your question, or have I just
did?
waffled?
Yes. And I will say, I am a chaos.
You answered it 5 minutes ago.
It totally also, the question comes from my own, I like to see things blow up. I like to see the order that you're under have to change through a rebellion or whatever it is. And so for me, part of that question is also well, you were fed a lie. Now, what do you do about it when right? And we see it from a few perspectives, but if there's a world where more people learn and then what happens, to me, that is also what can be really telling about people or, a specific character, sure, but a people I'm talking broader sense, and what they are made of, but also what they will stand for. Because you just said it, it's order, but is it I would say, is it the right order? No, it's this guy's reign. But what about that guy over there? Let's try him. Maybe he'll be better. It's vote. Let's have democracy.
And also being told that you think the order is good because that's what you've been taught to think.
Right.
And so I was interesting, again, going back to the Zeus being the storyteller, Zeus being the one who controls the history and controls what people believes. And he says, I am order. And so when you kind of think, well, maybe Zeus isn't a great thing perhaps for the world, then is order good? So what is the opposite of order? So is chaos necessarily a bad thing in this version of the world that we're trying to set up? So I
don't know. He didn't seem like order to me through a lot of it. I will say the midlife crisis.
Oh no, he's having an absolute meltdown.
No. Yeah, that's what I mean. I think if more people even knew what he was going through, just the way Hera had to manage him when he's pulling those drawers and he's looking for the right, and I just was, you're never going to find the right drawer, man. What are you doing? It was fascinating, but it was I also really enjoy watching people unravel. So it was just fun for me when you see this larger than life figure who, everyone is told and is been brought up to believe is so powerful, but they have weaknesses too, and I think that's the most important thing that we can remember in any situation, really, is everybody has something that makes them vulnerable.
Yeah, totally.
I know I asked you this about Clash of the Titans. I want to ask you about KAOS. Is there one character, maybe it's harder because you're writing them, but is there one character in KAOS that you feel most personally connected to after this journey through season 1?
I have a real soft spot for Caeneus, for sure. I loved writing him, and I loved working with Misha, who played him. And so the way I write, I use music a lot. So music, I have playlists for the different worlds of the show and then different characters. And I mentioned this to Misha, and he said, "Oh, have you got a playlist for me?" And I was like, "Yeah, you can have it if you want." So we shared that, and I don't know, we just I think just in creating that character together, and with Georgie and renewal, our directors, that was a kind of, that felt like a special thing. I mean, in terms of it's hard to pick because they really, I mean, I sound like I'm being diplomatic, but they really were all so great. I mean, working with Jeff and Janet
Mm.
on those scenes, they're incredible. I mean, and they're both very generous, and all the actors are very collaborative and generous. And I always like to know if people would like to tweak the lines, or do they want to try a version where they say something? Because I think when you do that, you get real gold. I mean, a lot of Zeus is my favorite lines of Zeus. But many of them are Jeff's and not actually mine. So
Okay, I
yeah.
feel like that would make me more nervous in something like this, where the lines to me, I feel like they have to have a little bit more specificity because they are drawing on something so classic.
The ones that are more, I mean, of course, and Jeff was very respectful. He would always get what was written, but
Sure.
then he might go a bit off piste or chuck something else in, which was by and large great. So, and just helped with his character, and he is a fantastic improviser. So you'd be crazy not to
Is it?
want that, I think.
Yeah. You mentioned a playlist, and you mentioned it specifically for Misha's character, but I'm curious if I heard also Romeo and Juliet was a big influence of yours. Was that on any of the playlists? If not his, any others?
Yes, well, the Baz Luhrmann film was a huge influence for me, and I think again it was like I remember seeing that, was it 1996 or
Yeah,
97 when that came out? It was my first year at senior school. I remember seeing it with my friend, and just I thought it was the most beautiful, kind of sexy, incredible thing I'd ever seen. And it was Shakespeare, which I sound like a Philistine at that point. Up until that point, I had found a bit boring,
No, I
which I shouldn't.
agree.
I
I was
shouldn't
gonna
say.
say,
So, but I studied. But I studied English literature. Like, I mean, I feel like people are going to be very cross with me for saying that. But I really enjoyed studying Shakespeare, and I liked. But I'd seen so many plays that were just felt I just didn't get it, and I found it really hard to connect. And that film, I just thought, my God, everything was so clear and made sense, and I understood it for the first time, and it just looked incredible. And the soundtrack for that, I mean, I think like most people my age, everyone had it on CD.
yeah.
I think it was how I first discovered Radiohead and Candy Staton, and it was this kind of eclectic, and Desiree Kissing You, like this soundtrack of disparate music and artists that kind of almost shouldn't work, but because you were making this huge world feel cohesive, it made sense together. And so that was very much an inspiration for me when we were finding the music for this. Can you have a show where you can have Dire Straits, ABBA, and Anoni? Yes, you can, because, well, I think you can. I mean, some people will disagree, but it's kind of, the music was so important to me, and also the look. I remember writing it in the pilot, going into Crete, this should feel like we're going into Baz Luhrmann's Verona. It was very controllingly specific. But
I'm glad you pointed that
Georgie,
out, though, because there were certain moments where I was watching, I was like, visually that reminds me of something, and I don't know if it was intentional or if it was like an homage. And so, like, to hear you say, "Oh, I wanted that," that's great.
Yeah, we definitely wanted that, and so Georgie Banks Davies, who was our lead director, she was really receptive to that, and just the way it was shot, the kind of camera moves, the grain we have there, the colors. Dick Lunn, our designer, and Rebecca Hale, our costume designer, they had that very much in their mind as well. So I think it was a useful reference for all of us, just in terms of the pace and the kind of feel and the heat that needs to come off that city, and the danger, but the excitement of it. You want to be there, but it's also it's an unsettling place. But yeah, that was very much an inspiration for Earth, and the sound and feel of the show. So yeah.
But not necessarily like the story, Romeo and Juliet, for anybody's particular arc.
No, very much not
Okay.
the story. Not the story. Yeah, it's not.
I just
it's
have
not
to
that.
say that, have you say that explicitly, because like you, I was not a Shakespeare fan. And that was also, Romeo and Juliet was my probably least favorite of the plays, because no
I
part of
think
that ever said romance to me, but everyone was like,
I
"Oh, young love." And I'm like, what is wrong with you?
yeah, they're
I'm
like,
like
but
12.
I think, but by the time I got, because then when I got to studying Shakespeare, I don't want to say I was not a fan.
Okay.
I think it just been in school, I'd kind of gone, I don't get it. I feel I should get it and I should like it, and I don't. And there's this thing. And then as I got older, and maybe I needed time to kind of appreciate it, and I was being taught it too young. I don't know, but I mean, I now I still find it hard sometimes watching a very traditional version of a Shakespeare play, because I find it hard to connect with it. But maybe that I'm sure that says more about me than anything else. But
No,
yeah,
and I didn't mean to put words in your mouth. I will say I still don't like it. So I don't know.
that's fair
I
enough.
went through what you went through too, all different ages trying it. And I like some of the adaptations, and I certainly things that are more modern that are, they take elements of it, they take themes, but not necessarily the exact story. I don't know. I don't know. Again, yeah, you're right. It says more about us probably, but I'm okay with that.
But I think also when you see something that does unlock the text, as it were, like actually Susie Isold, who plays Lackey, one of the
Mhm.
Fates, she did a one-woman Hamlet that started off in New York and toured around and came to London.
Wow.
It was incredible. It was incredible, and she's one performer. She played every part. It was, and again, it sounds like a boring thing. It was so clear. You got every word. You got every character. It was brilliant. It was totally brilliant. So I've seen incredible versions of Hamlet that were brilliant, and I finally went, I get it.
Hmm.
But often, I it was probably being a school production of The Tempest, as
Right.
popping up and
We
thinking,
all did
I
those.
don't get it. Yeah, and not really understanding it and feeling both bored and confused. So I think when it's done well, it is amazing.
Well, you'll have to tell Susie to come to LA with that show, and then I will see it, and then maybe I will no longer hate Shakespeare. Maybe she already
I'm
I think.
sure she would. I think she might be touring it again, so I hope she would. I'll mention it to her for sure.
Yes, because it's all about me. I do want to kind of tie two things together, and we may need a minute to make this make sense. But we started the conversation by talking about how much you watched Clash of the Titans, and you watched it obviously with your parents when you were young because you were very young. As you watched it with them over time, was this something that like was a communal experience that they also enjoyed? And did you bring your friends into this experience? And I promise this will tie to KAOS after you answer this question because I have a follow-up.
I don't remember. I don't remember friends being part of it. Maybe because I didn't want to be. I remember my sister becoming. So my sister's 3.5 years younger. Nearly 4 years younger than me. So she would have been involved. I don't know how I can't remember how I felt about that. As with everything, I might have been quite annoyed and jealous that she was part of something
Hmm.
that had been just mine. I'm sure I had a really mature response like that.
No,
But
that's
no,
exactly why I was asking because I wanted to know if this was like you were trying to build a community around a thing that you loved, or you wanted it for yourself because you loved it for yourself.
yeah, definitely the latter. I think I'm quite solitary about stuff. I think I'm happy to just love something. I'm happy to love stuff that other people don't like at all and be, I'm quite firm in it. I like something, I am obsessive about it. And it's great if you find people that also love the same thing, but I don't think I need a community to like something, I don't think.
Yeah. And then the reason I want to tie this to KAOS is because obviously this is a big global Netflix show that I imagine you do want communities of people to love so that you can get a season two.
Yeah.
But I am curious about how that experience has been. I mean, you mentioned a screening earlier, that was a professional screening, but is this a thing that you were like sitting your family down to watch with them?
When it's for me, I just mean like I say, and if there is a community, great. But I
Hmm.
think what I meant is I don't need a community to enjoy something. Having said that,
Sure.
one of my favorite films is Hedwig and the Angry Inch, and when you find other people that love that, you think, oh, we have something in common. This film is kind of niche, and you love it too, and how wonderful. So I think in that sense, it's great. So with this show, I mean, the thing I found the most moving and wonderful is when people have sent me screen grabs of Reddit boards or Twitter feeds or X, whatever you say, because I'm not on social media.
That's okay. We still say Twitter because we just refuse to
Okay.
call it X.
Okay. But people have sent me screen grabs of people really loving aspects of the show or certain characters. I think there's quite a big queer community that love it, which means so much to me. Because that was my hope, it would connect with people. So yeah, I mean, I'm thrilled. And actually, I spoke to my mum on the phone yesterday, and she got to the end finally, because she'd been watching it with my dad and my sister, I think, and she said, I just can't believe the little person that watched that film she's like, it's really it's crazy that you've done this. I think it was pride. It might it might have been. I'm hoping it was
I mean,
pride, not
I can't imagine it's not,
wild
because
confusion.
you have to figure, like, I will say my parents, tried to really limit what I was watching, both for fear that I was watching things too mature for me, but also for, like, don't rot your brain. TV rots your brains, what they used to say. And to see someone take a love of that and then turn it into a career, that has to be pride. Because,
No,
like,
it is. No, it is, and I think because they, I watched tons of films and TV when I was younger, and it's something we did together as a family as well. So I think it's definitely pride, and but it was a really amazing moment to, have seen it. And I've been working on it for 7 years now, I think. So it's been boring the pants off everybody in my family, going, it's not done yet, it's not done. Oh, there's this thing now, this thing. So I think everyone's just relieved it's finally out, and then also the fact that they're enjoying it is great. But yeah, I'm when I get a sense that there's a community of people who are into the show, I mean, God, it's an incredible feeling, because it's gone from something that's being on in your head to being on a page that lots of brilliant people have realized, actors and crew, and then for an audience to respond to it. I mean, there's what more could you want, really? That's the dream. So yeah, it's great.
I'm going to ask you a kind of a crazy question. If there was one episode or, like, one sequence that you feel like this is the thing people will watch over and over again, the way I watched, like, Clash of the Titans over and over again. Maybe they don't have time to watch the entire series or season over and over again. What is that one episode or that one sequence that you hope is the thing that catches on in that way, in that, like, passionate, I will say obsessive, because I don't think that's a bad word, obsessive way?
Okay, the moment there are two things. So in episode, there are lots.
I know, that's why it's a hard question.
I can't say what other people will like.
No, just what you would hope, based on, like, your own connection.
I feel I always came back to and just loved the moment where Zeus and Hera have just watched Minos kill Glaucus, his son, and they think that the prophecy is defeated. And then when Ari goes, oh my God, and she laughs, she goes, you got the prophecy wrong, Dad, and she kills him. I think that she does that so brilliantly. Minos is amazing. That scene is so well done, beautifully directed. And yeah, that moment, it feels like the two worlds are connecting, and I get chills watching that. I think the performance is so great. So that feels like a moment which feels big for the show. And then I think it's in episode 8. It's when Riddy meets Cassandra on the road, and then you cut to Caeneus, and she says a line appears, and then he brings his mother back to life, and you have that montage. And I think the music Isabella Summers wrote, the score is just, I love it. And I had to watch that montage so many times in the edit. We were kind of going back and forth about things, and I always, like, it just really got me. And I think it's because, even though at its heart the show is it's comical, hopefully, and there's levity, and that moment it's a serious moment, and hopefully it's about, to me, it's about hope and love and the ability of human beings to overcome things and rise up as one. And I think in that montage you kind of get all of the human sacrifice and all of the love and all of the heroism that's been there in those human stories, and it culminates in him bringing his mum back to life. And that moment I rewatched quite a lot.
I almost feel like it was an unfair question because you had to rewatch so much as you're going through the stages. So I'm
not going to tell you the stuff that I don't ever want to watch again, that I could like recite off by heart. And some bits that you go, I can't watch this. I think there was one day where the producer, we had to watch the same episode 5 times in a day. And I think because we had to get something, and we were just both like, I don't know. I can't tell you. And then with a bit of distance you can solve the problem. But I don't know why we did that to ourselves. But yeah, there's certain things that but it's nice now watching it with time going by, because you can really see it with some distance. But yeah, I'm a sucker. And the final montage to the yeah sacrilege, the way that they shot Georgie shot the Tasters walking off with Hera, that incredible drone shot, it's great. So so the bit that feels like a music video, no, I'm joking.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think, and then, but yeah, I think the bit in the labyrinth that combines the comedy and the drama in a way that I think is quite of the show. Um, but there's loads. I could go through all of them really.
No, I think these are great choices. I'm glad you brought up that moment where they got the prophecy wrong too, because that was kind of something I was hoping was, again, I didn't know the myth, whether or not, whatever, but I was like, I'm hoping that's going to happen because they keep literally saying she came out screaming. So like they're saying that for a reason. No one's paying
Yeah,
attention,
yeah.
but they're saying it for a reason. And to see it actually come to fruition was satisfying in a way that I was like, finally, somebody is
Oh,
paying
good.
attention. I mean, it's the woman. The men are never going to pay attention, but good. You know what? That made this more powerful.
Oh, good, good. Yeah, I think there was a couple of cuts where we realized I think we'd taken out the line. We were like, no one's gonna know that she came out first. So it's good that you noticed that because
Oh no, I
we
mean,
kept,
you maybe you took out some, but you left in
no,
enough.
no, as in
It was,
we had taken them all out and we thought, oh, we're not tracking it. We have to put them back in. I think we'd cut a scene and we're like, no, we've cut so we're piecing things back together. But
yeah.
yeah, hopefully it was enough that it wasn't too leading, but it was
No.
satisfying. Yeah.
And I think even if you had taken them all out, I think it would have been fine. I think like it would have taken you a minute more to understand. And I think maybe you would have needed a line of exposition or something, but I think like it still would have been fine because that's the whole point. It's like these prophecies aren't necessarily real. So we're holding on to
Yeah.
things. And I mean, again, maybe this is me projecting, but like even with, the reincarnation, like we're holding on to something. We don't really know it's true. We're just believing in it. And then now we're going to be proven wrong in certain places, and we're going to have to feel what that feels like. And I very much enjoy watching people feel what that feels like. Again, cynical person. It's fine. It's fine.
No, I don't think you seem cynical at all. Not at all. Oh, well,
Great.
you haven't.
Then this was a very successful episode because normally I'm just complaining about a lot of things. Okay, before we leave each other, I like to tell you where you can go ahead and find the things that we discussed on Made Possible by Pop Culture. And I keep forgetting to mention this, but nobody is actually paying me to list one service over another when I do tell you where to find things. There's no ad money or sponsorship yet. Hint, hint, maybe we'll see what happens. So for now, let's look at Charlie's pop culture influences from the past. We have Clash of the Titans. This is the 1981 movie, and there is a remake that was done about 15 years ago, but we didn't talk about that version, so I'm not going to consider that in this equation. Let's look at 1981 Clash of the Titans. It's available to stream on YouTube with ads. That's the only place it's available to stream. But I'm going to be honest, I don't like to watch ads. If you're like me, you may just want to rent it, and it is available places like Amazon and Apple for rental. Similarly, Romeo and Juliet, the 1996 Baz Luhrmann movie, not available to stream, but is available to rent on places like Apple and Amazon. And then, of course, there's Charlie's show. KAOS released season 1 on Netflix in late August. Obviously, it's available complete season to stream anytime you want, and they're still making their decision on season 2. So go ahead, watch it again, tell your friends, tweet about it, post about it on Instagram, TikTok, etc. Come back here, tell us what you thought. Tell me what you thought of the episode. Like, comment, subscribe, follow, etc., etc. As always, I'm Danielle Terciano. This is Made Possible by Pop Culture, the podcast, and we'll be back here next week for some more nostalgic goodness.